Hello, this is Mr. Stark, ready to give you the final lecture for Standard 5. You will be taking your Standard 5 vocabulary quiz today, so make sure you're ready for that. But first we have to talk about not one of my favorite topics. Most people would probably say the same thing, that being poverty. So before we start going over the graphs, the charts, the maps, one of the things that I like to tell my students, and really I'm telling myself this as much as my students, is that it's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the percentages, the maps, kind of the macro picture of poverty. I teach poverty 8 times a year, 4 classes a semester times 2 is 8, and then really during summer session as well. So it's easy for me to see poverty as a number issue. It is not. It is a people issue. It is people around you, neighbors, friends, maybe family, people you wouldn't suspect, but a lot of people living in poverty. We live in the richest nation in the world. Hopefully you saw from the GDP map that of the world's GDP, so all the stuff the world created, all the goods and services, we did about a quarter of it last year. We are by far the richest, most productive country in the world, but we still always have a poverty rate typically well above 10%. Which means if we're a nation of 330 million people, that's at least 33 million people that are living in poverty, people who are struggling day to day to get by, people that live with the shame, people that live with the fear, the uncertainty, and all the things that go along with it. So just as we go over some of these numbers, let's try to keep that in mind. But first, as you can see from the slide, the definition of poverty, and there's lots of definitions, there's lots of different types of poverty, is a situation where someone's income does not allow them to attain a minimum standard of living. Now, our government actually puts a dollar amount on it. So for a single person living in poverty, as you can see here from this number, if you make less than $12,490 a year, you are in poverty, technically according to the United States government. The current poverty rate, which is the percent of people living below the poverty line, is 12.3%. Now, obviously, the more people in your household, the higher this number is. The poverty rate is simply the percent of people living below that line. Now, one of the things that you need to keep in mind, though, is you don't have to be below that to get above government benefits. If you remember, if you make minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, work every week of the year, 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, you'll make a little over $15,000 a year. So technically you're not in poverty, which is why the government gives benefits like Medicaid, nutrition assistance, subsidized living to people that are even double the poverty rate. So that's something to keep in mind. As you can see from this chart I have here, poverty it's inequitable in the United States. Considering the total poverty rate, Hispanic and African American poverty rate is typically quite a bit higher than the overall average poverty rate. Here's what I was telling you about. So if you are a family of one, $12,490 last year, family of two, if you make below this amount, family of three, this amount, and if you keep going, that shows you technically if you're in the poverty line. So if you're a family of 4, 2 parents, 2 kids, if the household makes less than $25,750, that would mean that you are living in poverty. But remember, you don't need to be there in order to get government benefits. You can be, even double that to get some benefits. And this gives you the approximate hourly wage to get that yearly salary. This is the poverty rate in the United States from 1990 to 2018. This looks like a business cycle because the business cycle goes along with the poverty rate, or I should say vice versa. The poverty rate follows the business cycle. So we were in a time of recession in the early 1990s. Poverty spiked at a little bit above 15%. Then we went on our expansion. So it's inverse. On the business cycle, going down is a bad thing. That means the economy's GDP shrinking. But on the poverty graph, down means poverty rate's going down, so it's a good thing. And we went through a fairly large expansion in our economy. This was kind of like the glory days of the economy during the Clinton era. Again, whether he was responsible for that's a matter of debate, but that led to poverty getting all the way down between 11 and 12% in 2000. We underwent a mild recession over the next 4 years post 9/11. A lot of people blame 9/11 as being one of the impetuses of that. And then we recovered briefly for 3 short years, and then we had the Great Recession of 2007 and 8 and 9, which we saw poverty increasing back up to that 15+% level. We plateaued for about 2.5 years, and then the recovery started in roughly midway through 2010, and that recovered, honestly, all the way up until a few months ago, until we're in our next economic contraction. Whether it's a recession or not, it's going to depend on the data. Remember, recession is you have to have decreasing gross domestic product for 2 straight quarters, so for 6 months. A lot of analysts think we're going to get there, that it's going to be 6 months, but we don't know yet. So I'm going to call it a contraction. And so my guess is we're going to see that poverty rate going back up over the next several months. This shows you per state. So which states have the highest when adjusted for cost of living? Because remember, cost of living in California versus Indiana are drastically different. But when you do the cost of living equation in there, a lot of states you might be surprised about actually have the highest amounts of poverty, such as California, New York, Florida. If you think about Florida, that has a very high amount of retirees that live there because of the weather. A lot of retirees depend on solely Social Security. And if so, average Social Security payments around $1,300 to $1,400 a month, that means that you are trying to make it right around the poverty line. So there's a lot of poverty in that group as well. These are the 10 poorest states in the United States by poverty level. A lot of them southern states. A lot of legacy of that goes all the way back to slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow laws, Reconstruction. District of Columbia is a surprise for a lot of people, 16.2%. And Puerto Rico, U.S. territory, 43.1%. So although Puerto Rico has the image of a lush vacation tourist area, it has suffered through a number of reasons. And this is worldwide. This is the percent of people that live on below $1.25 a day, $1.25 a day. Now, this is oftentimes used for sometimes those very well-meaning charity commercials for, so-and-so live on less than $1 a day. And that is true, and that is very sad, but one of the things that hopefully you're thinking of at this point is, well, $1 a day in the United States is not the same as $1 a day in, India, or $1 a day in, Democratic Republic of Congo. As a matter of fact, in North Korea, $1 can buy enough corn, like 10 pounds of corn, which is enough to feed a family of 4 for several days. So, again, not the greatest measure of poverty. So, what are some of the things that affect poverty? And none of these are really groundbreaking. Most of us have heard of these issues. Education, on average, generally, the more education you get, the less percent you have of living in poverty. But again, we have people who are billionaires like Zuckerberg, who never finished college. I would say he's a rarity, though, but it does happen. Statistics really mean nothing to the individual. They just give general trends. But overall, the more education you get, the less of a chance you have of living in poverty. Discrimination, again, this goes back to America's sad, terrible legacy of slavery, discrimination, especially against African Americans, women as well. Were kept out of getting education, therefore they're kept out of a lot of the best jobs, and even when they got education, many times they still were kept from getting good high-paying jobs, and since the Civil Rights era, progress has been made, but there's still a lot of work to go from there. Demographic trends, so income is a big one. Education of parents, so if your parents have a higher income or more educated, chances are you will then be higher educated, have a higher income. Again, that doesn't mean that, if your parents didn't graduate from college or high school or don't make a lot of money, that's your destiny. My mentor from my undergrad, who I, still is my mentor, talk with him all the time, he was the first one in his family to go to college. And not only did he go to college, he got 2 master's degrees and a PhD in religious history. So he bucked that trend, and it happens all the time. Family size. That's no surprise there. A family of 15 is going to have a much greater chance of being in poverty than a family of 2. I once read about a family a couple years ago who just had their 13th child. They are all boys. They kept trying for a girl, and they didn't get a girl, so they stopped at 13. They obviously have a much higher chance of poverty than, again, a family of 2 or 3. Married versus single parents. We live in an era where oftentimes women in the past were discouraged from working out of the home in certain eras. That has been changing. So if there's a dual income family, there are less of a chance of being in poverty. But as you can see from the stats here, even for single parent households, it's still a quarter is still not good, but it's not like it's a majority. As well as people living alone, it's about a 1 in 5 chance. And then obviously during a recession, you have more poverty. So we're going to see our poverty rate going up probably in the coming months. So how has the government tried to stop poverty? So we're looking at the government response, not like private responses. Since the 1960s, when President Johnson declared his war on poverty, there have been moderate successes and moderate failures in, he called it the war on poverty. Trillions have been spent on it, on programs such as the TANF, which is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. These are basically non-food assistance that people get, such as paying for utilities or medical assistance or job training. One of the biggest hindrances for single parent families to get a good job is finding childcare. So they help find legitimate, bona fide health or child care for their kids so they can actually train for a better job or get a better job. A lot of these require recipients to find work within 2 years, so it's not just indefinitely. And a lot of them also require them to work, 30 hours a week in either volunteer or lower paying jobs. Food stamps. In Indiana, it's called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is called the SNAP program. This is for groceries only. This, despite popular myth, you can't buy alcohol or tobacco or non-food items on this. It's used to be called food stamps because they're actually stamps that you tear out, but now it looks just like a credit card. You really wouldn't know the difference if you didn't know what to look for. And again, this is to help people get back on their feet, to provide their families with nutritious food. Until they can get back on their feet. Again, these are known as safety nets because they're meant to, someone falls, they fall on the net, they bounce back up, they climb back up and try again. That's the rationale behind these programs. Now, whether they actually end up working that way, well, there really is no black and white yes or no answer. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Medicaid, we've already discussed that. That is health insurance for lower income individuals of any age. And Social Security. That's meant, under Roosevelt, it was meant to be a supplement to saving for retirement. It really wasn't supposed to be your only retirement plan because, again, if you average, even if you get the max, which is around $2,000 a month, that's only $24,000 a year. And my generation, by the time you average in inflation and longer life expectancies, you're going to need excess of $1.5 to $2 million in retirement accounts to be able to retire when you're like 67. That's what our financial advisor tells us. If you're making, $1,500 even to $2,000 a month, that's just not going to cut it. That's just a fraction of what you're going to need. So it's really meant to be a supplement to you saving. One of the best things that a fellow teacher who's much older than me told me when I became a teacher is save as much as you can as early as you can, and I would echo that. Percentage of population on food stamps. So as you can see, in Indiana, we're green. We're sort of in the middle. The red states, they're Oregon, New Mexico, West Virginia. This doesn't necessarily mean this is just the percentage that's on poverty because you have to apply for food stamps. You don't necessarily, if you're in poverty, some people don't apply for food stamps. And that's it. One of the questions that I would ask you for challenge questions is, besides these government programs, what are some other solutions that either you know of that have been tried or that you would think of trying? And I've gotten a lot of really good answers. Unfortunately, not able to get to that because I want you guys to be able to take a moment, study for your vocab quiz, and then get that hammered out. Next class, you'll have your standard 5 test. I attached a study guide to today's agenda. You don't have to necessarily complete it, but make sure you know the things that are on it. I would highly urge you to complete the GDP practice question on it. Make sure you know how to do that. You will have a GDP practice question on the bell work for Thursday for that next class, and you will also have the standard 5 test in the Google form. I hope you guys are doing as well as possible. Again, I miss you all. I miss our conversations. I miss our laughs. And I hope to see you guys in the near future. Talk to you later. Mr. Stark out.